Okay. Yeah. So I'll ask. Okay. Thanks to the workshop organizers for inviting me, and thanks to all of you for being here. So I'm going to talk about this result with Prahlad Darsha, who's at PIFR and currently visiting Rutgers. So this is about AC0, something I spoke about at the tutorial. For those of you who weren't there but were at Mysore workshop earlier this year, this is the same thing that Prahlad spoke about, so you can tune off. But for the rest of you, so I'm going to tell you something more about polynomial approximations to AC0. So just to recall, so what are AC0 circuits, right? So we spoke about this during the tutorial. So circuits are computational models when you're looking at algorithms that deal with inputs at a fixed input length, like fixed. So you're looking at n-bit inputs and want computational models to deal with those. So Boolean circuits in general are a nice computational model here, and AC0 circuits are Boolean circuits that are made up of AND gates, OR gates, and OR gates, and also NOT gates. Right? So these are the basic building blocks of our Boolean circuits. So made up of AND gates, OR gates, and NOT gates. So you have variables at the bottom here. Some of them have NOT gates on top of them. You can always assume with a NOT gate here at the bottom for some reason. Then there are OR gates, AND gates, etc. And at the end, you compute some sort of Boolean function of your input. Okay? So that's an AC0 circuit. So what makes this an AC0 circuit is that the depth of this circuit, so the longest path from a leaf variable to the output gate, which is on top here, is a constant. Okay? The length of longest path is a constant. That's the depth of the circuit, and that's what makes it AC0. Okay. So when we look at an AC0 circuit, the main notion of complexity that we consider is the number of Boolean operations performed by the circuit. This is the number of gates, so the number of OR symbols, the number of AND symbols, all of them together. That's the size of the circuit, and that's what we're really interested in minimizing. So an efficient circuit might be a polynomial size circuit. So we want to know if a function that we're interested in has polynomial size AC0. Okay. And as I said, the depth of the circuit is again an important parameter, and here the depth is a constant. Yeah. So throughout, think of the depth as like 10. The depth 10 circuit. So when I'm talking about AC0 circuits of size S, so S gates, and depth D, I'll say AC0 SD. Okay. Sometimes people simply say AC0, and that means the size is assumed to be a polynomial in the input length, and the depth is assumed to be a constant. Okay, so I should say that I think this talk should end in about 45 minutes or so. So feel free to stop me, slow me down, anything to make it go all the way until lunch. So that's a blank slide. Okay, so right. So when we're dealing with AC0 circuits, we spoke about this briefly in the tutorial. So what we want to do are we want to show that certain functions have AC0 circuits that are of small size. Certain other functions we want to show that they do not have AC0 circuits of small size. And both of these we kind of saw possibly in our tutorial, and in particular I showed you that majority function does not have AC0 circuits of small size. So when you are trying to prove lower bounds for AC0 like this, we have typically go to a bunch of techniques from our toolbox that we've developed over the last few days. Okay. So what are these techniques? Well, one of these is called random restrictions. Okay. So it's not something I'm going to go into in detail because it's not the focus of my talk. But random restrictions roughly say that if I'm given an AC0 circuit that's not too big, I can set a few bits and make it a constant. Okay. So if you want to think about this in an intuitive way, just think about an AND gate or an OR gate. If I have an AND gate, it looks at lots of input bits. By fixing one of the input bits to 0, I can just make the AND gate to 0. Doesn't matter what the remaining input bits are. Yeah. Similarly, if I have an OR gate that has a lot of input bits, I can set one of the bits to 1 and the OR gate collapses to a 1. Okay. Something similar is true for general AC0 circuit, and there's this whole technique of random restrictions about how to exploit this, etc. So that's a great way of analyzing AC0 circuits. And showing, for example, that the parity function, the sum of n bits modulo 2, does not have small AC0 circuits. Okay, but that's not the focus of this talk. Another way of analyzing AC0 circuits, something we saw in the tutorial part of it, is polynomial approximation. Okay, so this is something we saw, and this is what this talk is going to be about. Alright, good. So, what are polynomial approximations? Quite purpose. Just to begin, recall from the tutorial, or if you're not in the tutorial, recall that any Boolean function can be represented as a polynomial. Right? So, if you have a Boolean function of any Boolean, you can write it as a polynomial, a multilinear polynomial. Right? So, for example, let's start with a function like a parity function. Okay? So, it's the sum of n bits modulo 2. So, we saw it's obviously a polynomial of degree 1 if you're working with a field f2. but it can be written as a multilinear polynomial of any field. Okay. So in this particular talk, I'm going to look at multilinear polynomials over the real numbers, so real coefficients. So in particular, the parity function, which from this representation not clear at all, can be written as a multilinear polynomial with real coefficients. Right? Only when you do that, its degree blows up. It's a linear polynomial, hence its degree blows up all the way to n. This is the maximum one. Okay. So we saw this particular example in the tutorial, but let me just recall it. So here's a polynomial computing parity. So since I'm working over the reals, I can easily transform 0, 1 to 1 minus 1 via the simple linear change in basis. Okay. And the advantage to doing this is that adding bits modulo 2 is kind of equivalent in some very intuitive sense to multiplying ones and minuses. Right? So if I add 3 bits modulo 3 ones modulo 2, I get 1. Similarly, if I multiply 3 minus 1s in the real numbers, I get minus 1, etc. So if I make 0 correspond to 1 and 1 correspond to minus 1, addition modulo 2 over 0, 1 becomes multiplication of 1s and minus 1s. So you can use this to easily write down a polynomial representation of the parity function. It looks something like this. I just multiply these 1s and minus 1s together. And you can use this to easily show that when you write parity as a polynomial, it becomes a degree n polynomial. Okay. So parity is a very complicated looking polynomial. So now you can ask, if I want to do similar things with AC0, right, a circle made up of AND or a NOT gates, can I say something better? You can ask whether functions in AC0 can be computed by low degree polynomials. Yeah. And again, if you recall what we did in the tutorial, the answer is no. So simple functions like the AND function, the OR function, again when you write them down as polynomials, they become degree n polynomials. Right? For the AND function, it's obvious, you just multiply the bits, that's a polynomial. For the OR function, it's something a little more complicated like this, but again, it's a degree n polynomial. Okay. So the degree of a polynomial representing a Boolean function is not a great way of capturing what differentiates AC0 from non-AC0. Right? Because AC0 functions can have degree n, non-AC0 functions like parity can also have degree n, so not a great differentiation. However, when you change the notion of computation by polynomial to allow approximations by polynomials, things change drastically. Okay, and this is the key technique that's used in proving a bunch of AC0 developments. So what we can show is that OR can be approximated in a suitable sense by low degree polynomials. Okay, and what is the suitable sense? Well, if you think of a polynomial as an algorithm, it's a really simple algorithm for computing a Boolean function. It's a deterministic algorithm. There's no randomness involved. But if I allow the polynomial to use randomness, okay, this is the notion in which we're going to approximate Boolean. So we're going to allow polynomials that use randomness and nevertheless compute your function with high probability. And this is the notion of approximation under which OR, AND, etc. have low degree polynomials, but let's say the parity function and the majority function do not have low degree polynomials. Maybe I should just go that side. Oh, put it down. Alright. So OR can be approximated by low degree polynomials in this sense. So this is what we call probabilistic polynomials, if you recall the tutorial. Okay. So let me just, the key to proving the lower bound is to show that, okay, once OR can be approximated, all of AC0 can be approximated, etc., but parity cannot even be approximated by these low degree polynomials. Okay. In the tutorial, we show that majority cannot be approximated. A similar proof works for parity over the reals, and then when that implies that parity does not have small AC0. Okay. So let me just do a brief kind of overview of how this approximation of OR works here, because that's really the key to approximating AC0, and it's going to kind of lead into the results that I'm going to present. So this is actually an old result, not due to us. It's an old result of Tarui and others, so I'll talk about it. So now what I want to do is I want to approximate the OR function. Maybe I should just write down the definition of this probabilistic polynomial. So what's the light for this one? This is last one, right? Alright. Maybe I'll just write it down so that so what is a probabilistic polynomial for the OR function? Right. So it's a randomized algorithm. So you think of your polynomial as your basic algorithm. So it's a randomized algorithm. What does that mean? So P is a distribution. So it's a probability distribution over polynomials of some degree at most some. It's a distribution over polynomials, not a fixed polynomial, but a distribution over polynomials. With what property? Well, what does a randomized algorithm do? For every possible input, so for every a in 0, 1 to n, the probability that a random polynomial from this distribution agrees with your function at a is at least 1 minus epsilon. Okay. So the probability that disagrees is at most. Okay, so this is the notion of approximation that we are working with. Right. So what I want to show is that the OR function under this notion of approximation actually has very low degree polynomials. So how do we do this? So during the tutorial we saw such a construction when we were working over the field f2. Okay, the field f2. And the nice thing with the field f2 is that there are only two possible outputs, 0 and 1. Okay. Over the reals you have to be a little more careful because values other than 0 and 1 start to enter and you have to ensure that you don't output those things with high probability. Okay. So if you go back and do the construction of the tutorial that we saw in tutorial over the reals, you'll see that there all sorts of problems start happening because the polynomial is not outputting a 0, 1 value but a larger value, and then that's the problem. Okay. So a slight modified version of that construction though does work over the reals, and that's what I'm going to describe here. Okay. So let's just start off with a simpler case of the problem. Right. So suppose, I want to compute the OR function. So what the OR function is 0 at the all zeros input, and it's non-zero at any non-zero input. So let's assume right now that the input I've been given is either the 0 input or it's a non-zero input that satisfies the following property. The weight of the input, which is the number of ones in the input, is between some 2 to the k minus 1 and 2 to the k. Okay. So I know it to within a factor of 2. Okay. So I'm telling you this beforehand. It's either 0 or it's something like this. Okay. So how do I compute the OR function given this? Right. But I have to do it over the reals. So how am I going to do this? Well, it's a very simple idea. So let O be the set of indices where this input vector x is 1. So that's a set of size between 2 to the k minus 1 and 2 to the k. What we're going to do is randomly sample from O. Of course, we don't know O because we don't know the set of indices. But what we do is we randomly sample with some probability that ensures that since the size of O is something we roughly know, we end up sampling exactly one element of O. That's kind of the idea. So what are we going to do? We're going to choose a bunch of random sets. These random sets are going to be chosen independently of each other. And for each set, what we're going to do is we're going to include each I in the set, each possible index in the set with probability 1 over 2 to the k minus 1. Okay, right? So the size of O is roughly 2 to the k minus 1, between 2 to the k minus 1 and 2 to the k. So I'm including each element of O into my set. Though I don't know O, I'm including every element with probability 1 over 2 to the k minus 1. So in particular, I'm including each element of O with probability 1 over 2 to the k minus 1. So an expectation, I expect between 1 and 2 elements of O to land at. Right? So suppose O has 128 elements, between 128 or 256 elements, I'm picking each element with probability 1 over 128. So I expect between 1 and 2 elements to land up among the elements. Okay. So what happens if this happens? So what we are going to do is that with constant probability, our set is going to contain exactly one element of O. So what can we do when that happens? Well, what we can do is, assuming we were lucky, assuming we are lucky and exactly one element of O landed up in our set, what we are going to do is we just sum the bits. Right? Now, if the original input was 0, then the sum is anyway 0, so the OR is correct. But if the original input actually satisfies this promise that the weight is between 2 to the k minus 1 and 2 to the k, and further we are lucky enough to sample exactly one of the indices where it's 1, then the sum actually outputs 1, which is the right answer. Okay. Right. So is this reasonably clear to everybody? So this is the basic building block of this polynomial. Just randomly sample with the right probability. Of course, knowing this right probability means for that you need to know the number of ones we input, but let's just forget about that for now. But once we know that, when we sample with the right probability, this does the right thing with constant probability. Alright, so this is a fairly easy exercise of probability, so I'm not going to show that this actually works. But what we're going to do is, assuming this, the rest of the construction is actually trivial. Okay, so what are we going to do? So now we are doing it with constant probability, but we want to reduce the error to something like epsilon here. So what do? Well, what we do is we pick a bunch of sets, right? And we output 1 if any one of those things outputs 1. Okay. So this is what we do. So this is the same thing that we did over F2. 1 minus product, 1 minus the polynomials that we use for each set. Okay, we pick t sets and we do the same thing for every set. Take 1 minus that polynomial, multiply them together, and 1 minus that. Okay, so why does this work? So if x was the all zeros input, right? then these polynomials, the random polynomials that we pick, they are all always 0. Right? So 1 minus 0 is 1, so we have a product of 1. So the product evaluates to 1, so 1 minus 1 is 0, and we have 1. Yeah, that's when x is 0. If x is non-zero, if any one of these polynomials evaluated to 1, right, in the product, any one of these polynomials evaluated to 1, then 1 minus that polynomial will evaluate to 0, and that entire product will become 0. Right? All we need is to be lucky once. Right? And each time we are lucky with constant probability. So probability that we are unlucky t times goes down exponentially with t. So if t is a large enough number, this probability can be made very small, and we are going to be lucky with high probability. So if you've not seen this kind of thing before, I want to stress one point. This is a randomized polynomial, right? So it's not that I'm assuming that the input is random. I'm assuming that the polynomial that I'm choosing, I'm choosing a random polynomial. Right? So the randomized algorithm that works for every input that currently satisfies some promise. So is this part clear to everybody? Okay. Okay, so now this is more or less the construction, except that we had some sort of promise. Okay, so this works with this probability. Except that we don't know this case, right? We don't know what the weight of the input is. Okay. So what do? Well, we guess. Right? So what we have to do is we have to find an integer k such that the weight of the input is between 2 to the k minus 1 and 2 to the k. Right? And how many such values for k are there? There will be log n such values, right? Because the weight of the input cannot be more than n, so it's that was log n such values. So I'll try every. Okay. So now I don't know which case, so I try k equals 1, k equals 2, k equals 4, k equals 8, etc. all the way until k equals log n. That's 2 to the k, but k equals 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way till log n, and then one of those will go. Yeah. And so how do I combine all those cases together? Well, I just combine those polynomials, these polynomials into one polynomial in the same way. This is the final point. Okay. So it's 1 minus product 1 minus these polynomials. Okay. And you can check again by the same reasoning. When x is 0, all these polynomials are 0, so therefore you get 0. When x is 1, with high probability, one of these polynomials is going to be 1, so that term will vanish, and therefore with high probability you will output 1. Okay, it's the same. So that concludes the construction of the approximating polynomial for the order. This reasonably clear to everybody? Yeah, I was told that you have to stop for 10 seconds when you answer. So is it clear still? Alright, good. Okay, so what we proved is, as I said, a theorem that was known from a while ago. So it's a theorem from roughly 1990. All these people kind of proved it more or less the same way. Yeah. So what I showed is the following. This is what we just proved. There exists a distribution. This is a probability distribution of polynomials. What's the degree of this polynomial? Well, the degree of this polynomial is the number of sets we chose for every k, and that number of sets was like log 1 over epsilon to make this error smaller than epsilon. Okay. Times the number of guesses, right? Because again we didn't know k, so we had to guess which k works, and there were log n guesses. Right? So you have a log n for the number of k's, and a log 1 over epsilon for the number of sets at each guess. So total degree is log n times log 1 over epsilon, and this polynomial, a random polynomial from this distribution, gets the odd function right with high probability. So this is the construction. Once you have this construction, you can plug it in the same way we did it over F2. You can plug it in to get actually approximating polynomials for all of these. Okay. So this is called a probabilistic polynomial of degree. Yeah, it's a probabilistic polynomial as I defined it. And yeah, so here's an important point that is not a problem over F2, and that's what makes the real case actually significant. Right. So when the polynomial, so as I said, the polynomial is equal to the odd function with high probability. Now you can ask what happens when the polynomial is not equal to the odd function. In such a scenario, we don't have any control over the polynomial. Okay, we have some slight control, but it could be 100, it could be 1,000, it could take really large values depending on n as well. So we don't have much control over the polynomial. And indeed, the definition I don't say anything. I just say it's equal with high probability. When it's not equal, what is it? I don't say anything. And in general, this construction also, you don't get a polynomial that does something very good when it's not. When it's not equal, it's off by a large margin. It's not Boolean. So this is why the F2 scenario, which we saw in the tutorial, is slightly different from the real scenario. In F2, there will be two possible values, 0 or 1, so if they're wrong, you have the other Boolean value, but here it's a little. Alright, so, right. So as I said, once you have this basic building block for the OR you can use this to construct probabilistic polynomials for all of AC0 in a simple inductive way, right? So what's AC0? It's a depth 10 circuit, right? D equals 10. So what we do is we start at the bottom and we start constructing polynomials, right? So what do we have? We have variables. Variables are degree 1 polynomials by definition, right? We have NOT gates. Well, a NOT gate, NOT of f of x is 1 minus f of x. So if f of x is approximated by a low degree polynomial, 1 minus f of x is approximated by 1 minus that low degree polynomial. It's fine. Okay. When you have an AND gate, like the gates on top, you can use De Morgan's laws and convert it to an OR gate, okay, and then approximate each of the OR gate in the way we said, and then approximate the AND gate. Right? So overall, you can approximate the entire AC0 circuit by approximating each of these gates in this way, and then just composing the approximations to get a result like this. Okay. So for every f in AC0 ST and epsilon in 0, 1, there exists a distribution of polynomials of degree at most. I want to be a little precise about this, so let me just go over it carefully. It's log s over epsilon to the order d, yeah, with the same property as we had here. So what we get is log s is the number of gates, over epsilon, where epsilon is the final error that we want, whole to the d. Okay. So why do we get log s over epsilon to the d? Well, roughly the reason is that the way you bound the error of this polynomial is via union law. Okay. So what you want to ensure is that at every gate, the error is at most epsilon over s. So that overall, even when you add up the errors across the gates, you get at most epsilon. Okay. Since you have epsilon over s at every gate, you're going to get a log s over epsilon at least at every gate. So you get log s over epsilon. Questions about this?
The log n is absorbed.
Yeah, the log n is kind of absorbed. That's a lower order term and it doesn't show. Okay. It shows up but it's a constant in the exponent. So it's either 2d or d depending on whether you have the log n. Okay. Alright. So this is yeah. Okay. So what we've done is that now, as a result of all this, we have a probabilistic polynomial of degree whatever, polylog s, that epsilon approximates at. And again, this polynomial has the same kind of bad features, is that when it's not getting f correctly, it can actually take some arbitrary real value. That can be bad for reasons. Okay. Alright, so, and the question that we started off when we were doing this result is, can this polynomial in general, the degree of this polynomial be true? In particular, we are looking at the dependence on epsilon. Okay. So there's some very good reasons why this log s to the d cannot be true. But the dependence on epsilon, that's kind of up for grabs. So we are wondering whether there's dependence on epsilon. And the answer is yes, and that's kind of the main result. It's a very simple result. Okay. So the result is that for every f in AC0 ST and epsilon, there is a distribution of polynomials, and now the degree kind of slightly better in terms of epsilon. Okay. So previously the log 1 over epsilon was inside the order d, but it's now log s to the order d times log 1 over epsilon. So to think of it just as a function of log 1 over epsilon, it's now a linear function as opposed to being a degree order d polynomial. Okay. So it's linear in log 1 over epsilon. And again you have the same problem. Px equals fx with the probability at least 1 minus epsilon. It's kind of a technical result, but the proof is extremely simple. Okay. So I should say that the reason there is no this result is pop out of thin air. So similar things can be done over f2 in a very simple way. Okay. So this is something that I did with Swastik Gopal some time ago. And also other finite ways, things like f3, f5, etc. You can do it in an extremely simple way. The open question was to do it over the reals, and we did it over the reals. That's the thing. Okay, so it's not very surprising that this happened, but it takes a little bit, one observation more than what the previous guy said. Okay, so this is a kind of a technical sounding improvement to this theorem of Toda and all. So why were we looking at this? Okay, so this is a really ugly result, but it turns out that it has a nice application. Okay, so this is what kind of motivated us to do this. And this application is to pseudo-random generator. Okay. So what's a pseudo-random generator? Well, a pseudo-random generator, so if you've not seen this kind of thing before, what is a pseudo-random generator? It's something that's used to convert, in some sense, randomized algorithms to deterministic algorithms. So what's a randomized algorithm, right? So it's a big box, A, right? It takes an input sum, let's say input y, okay? But it also takes as input some randomness, and let's call that x, okay? And it outputs an answer, 0 or 1. And now, typically what we would like to do is to turn any such randomized algorithm into a deterministic one. Okay, because we don't like randomness to some extent. Right? Randomness is hard to come by in practice, etc. So we don't want to use randomness. What we'd like to do is take this randomized algorithm and convert it to deterministic one. We are not able to do that yet, but the first step might be to reduce the amount of randomness that this algorithm uses. So it might be using a 10,000 weight random string, we want to bring that 10,000 down to 100. That's some progress. Ultimately, we want to bring 100 down to 0. Maybe we don't know how to do that yet, but getting 10,000 down to 100 is definitely progress. Okay. And what is a pseudo-random generator? It's just something that allows you to do that. Okay. So what you are going to do is replace this random string by a box. So this box I write PRG for pseudo-random generator, which takes as input a much shorter random string. Okay. A really short, let's say 100-bit random string, and outputs a 10,000-bit random looking string that the algorithm really can't tell the difference. That's pseudo-random. So how do you do it? Define it formally. Well, it looks something like this. It's a distribution on 0, 1 to the n, and here this n is 10,000. Right? It's the number of random strings the algorithm needs. A distribution D is set to epsilon pool, so it's set to pool a class C into thinking that it's random. If no algorithm from that class C can distinguish between a uniformly random string, between the old X that we had here, and this new pseudo-random string, the output of this box. So if the algorithm accepts with roughly the same probability on both the random string and the pseudo-random string, then you say that the pseudo-random distribution is pseudo-random. It pools this class. And then there's a parameter epsilon that dictates how much this string pools the class. Does this definition make sense to everybody? Okay. Okay. So there's some nice interesting cases in which we can do this. So for example, the case that we're going to be looking at are AC0 circuits of size S and depth T. So that's the class of algorithms. Right? So this A comes from AC0. Okay. And the kinds of pseudo-random, these boxes that we're going to be looking at, are standard boxes that are used a lot in algorithms and propensity theory. So they have distributions that are k-wise independent. So what's a k-wise independent distribution? A distribution is k-wise independent. If you look at any k coordinates, they look uniform and independent. That's a k-wise independent distribution. So you might know from, let's say, a basic course in algorithms that there are pair-wise independent distributions. Any pair of indices will look independent and uniform distributed. But in general, for every k, you can find non-trivial k-wise independent distributions. So it can be generated with very few random bits. They're much faster than the uniform. And the question that we want to address here was, what is the smallest k such that every k-wise independent distribution pools its? Okay. So suppose I look at only one particular class of pseudo-random generators, those that come from k-wise independent distributions. What's the smallest k so that every k-wise independent distribution pools its? What's the smallest such kind of box that can be used as PRG for instance? Okay. So this is a question that was motivated back in the 90s by a conjecture of linear Nissan. So for very good and well-motivated reasons, they kind of conjectured that the amount of independence required to pool AC0 is polylogarithm. Okay. So just to understand, right, the normal uniform distribution is n-wise independent. All the bits are independent and uniformly distributed. A polylog-wise independent distribution is one where only, let's say, roughly log many bits. If you look at, they look independent and uniformly distributed. But if you look at slightly more than that, then they're no longer uniform. Okay. So what this conjecture says is any such distribution, any distribution that looks random, if you look only at a small number of bits, such a distribution pools it. Okay. So as I said, there's a very good reason to conjecture something like this. And but the first progress on this conjecture was made back in 2007, so about almost 20 years, where it was shown that for depth 2 circuits, which are just DNF formulas, it is in fact true. So log squared n-wise independence is enough to pull DNF. So this is proved by Balzi, a massive 60-page paper, and then Rasberov brought it down to like 4 pages with a very simple, very neat. Right. So once this was done, people start thinking, okay, maybe the general conjecture is within reach, and indeed within a year or so, it was shown by this guy Braverman that polylog-wise independence would. So in particular, this log n is replaced by log n to the something that depends on the depth of the circuit. Then in fact that much independence is sufficient to do it. Right, so let me just take Braverman's theorem kind of formally here, because our improvement will be in the parameters here. So what he precisely proves is that if you look at AC0 circuits of size S and depth T, right? So my algorithm here is a AC0 circuit of size S and depth T, is epsilon pooled by a k-wise independence, so it is polylog, but it's log S to the d squared. So again, I want to bring to your attention the kind of same kind of dependence that we had with the approximating polynomial. You have there we had log s over epsilon to the d. Here we have log s over epsilon to the d squared. Okay. So this is what we are going to do. And there are two main ingredients to this proof. Okay. One of these we've already seen is polynomial approximations of AC0 over the reals. So it's important that it's approximations over the reals here. Okay. And the second is a different kind of approximation that we haven't seen. It's a L2 approximation. So an L2 approximation is a polynomial which is not equal to a circuit with high probability, but most of the time it's close to the value. Right? So if the circuit is 0, most of the time the polynomial is close to 0. The circuit is 1, most of the time the polynomial is close to 1. And all this makes sense over the real numbers only. So this is all defined over here. Okay. And so we also have polynomials for AC0 with this property. And they satisfy other nice properties as well. And this is called the custom sum linear Mancini sum. So Bravman put these two together in a super clever way and did all sorts of stuff and proved this. Very, very good. Right. And the ideas behind this go back to these random restrictions and other things that I promised not to talk about, but I'm talking about. So this classical switching lemma, just do random restrictions, etc. And this is used to prove this. Okay. Alright, so once Bravman proved this theorem, the obvious question was whether that was time. Can you improve this theorem? So the parameters in this theorem said log s over epsilon to the d squared Poisson independence coefficient. Is that really necessary? Maybe you can do it with less. And again, there's very good reason to conjecture that you can do it less. And Tal in 2014 actually improved the dependence. So he brought the d squared down, d squared in the exponent down to 2. Okay. And again, there's very good reason to believe that d should be in the exponent, not d squared. So it's all well motivated. So he brought the d squared in the exponent down to 2. And what was the main technical part of this improvement? Well, he used an improved switching lemma, again, to do with random restrictions. So he used an improved version, analysis of AC0 circuits using random restrictions that we recently proved by Vipagliato, Matsuda, Faturi, and Hostal. And he plugged this into the proof of Bravman's theorem. A part of the insight is to understand that this improvement actually yields improvements in Bravman's theorem. So he plugged it in and did some additional work, and that was the result. Okay. So now you can ask, okay, is this the end of the road? Can we do a little bit better? And in particular, can the dependence on epsilon here be improved in the similar way that we improved the dependence on epsilon in our theorem? And I wouldn't be asking this question if the answer was no, so the answer is yes. And indeed, this is why we improve our theorem. So, as we call the Bravman's theorem, there are two ingredients. One is the polynomial approximation over the reals, the kind of thing that we've been looking at, and the L2 polynomial approximation. So, the improved switching lemma improves the L2 polynomial approximation, gives an improvement in Bravman's theorem, d squared down to d. And now we give an improved polynomial approximation over the reals, and that allows us to bring the log 1 over epsilon out of the order d, and we get AC0 SD is equal by log s to the order d times log 1 over epsilon by d. Okay, just to say again, it's the same kind of improvement that we got the polynomial world. Previously, log 1 over epsilon was raised to the power d, and now it's linear in log. Yeah. Okay. So this looks like a technical improvement, but log 1 over epsilon is kind of the gold standard pseudorandom generator. Okay, so whenever you have pseudorandom generator that pulls a class with error epsilon, you expect a log 1 over epsilon in the seed length, and in this case that translates to d. So log 1 over epsilon is very good reason to expect it. Okay, so it's a very good reason to, since you expect it, it's a good reason to fight for it, and when you get it, it's a good reason to be happy, because nobody had gotten log 1 over epsilon before, so we are doubly happy. So this is the first PRG for AC0, irrespective of independence or otherwise, to obtain this optimal dependence on epsilon. Right. And now, but we are not home yet in some sense, because you can still ask, okay, there's this fudge factor of order d in the exponent, so that the constant hiding there, can you improve that constant to the right constant? And it turns out you can't improve it by more than a constant, and this is one of the motivating things that I said. Drove this entire conjecture. It's known that if you want to fool AC0, you need so much independence. So this independence is roughly log s to the d times log 1 over epsilon. Okay. So we have log s to the order d times log 1 over epsilon, but you can't do better than log s to the d times log 1 over epsilon. It's not possible. Okay. And if you stare at our parameters in our theorem a little bit, you can show that the constant in the order is 3. And we know we can improve it to 2.5, but improving the 2.5 down to 1 seems to require new stuff. Improvements in polynomial approximations, etc., and we haven't been able to do it. So that's a great open question. Okay, good. So that's all I wanted to say about PRG. So finally, let me tell you about a slightly technical third result we have in our result, and then I'll tell you a single proof and we'll be done. Okay. So the final result we have is about whether the polynomial approximations that we've seen for the OR function, like the basic building block that we saw, the polynomial approximations for the OR function can actually be improved further. There's a very good reason to look at this result. As I said, the order D in the Braverman theorem we currently have is not valued. So to improve that order D, you need to improve the polynomial approximations further. So the first thing is to look at the basic building block and see if you can improve that. So we saw that the OR function has probabilistic polynomials of this degree. There were log n guesses and then log 1 over epsilon sets for each guess. So that was log n times log 1 epsilon. Can you improve this log n? Maybe by a completely different idea. And the third result is that, well, maybe you can improve it, but not by an amazing amount. You need a square root log n. Okay. So again, this sounds like a technical result, but this is almost the first result along these lines. The second result along these lines, and the first one to come within a ballpark of log n. So it's a nice thing. And so the previous best low bound is like log n, which is exponentially worse. So that's a nice thing. Okay. And all these bounds. So again, if you go back to what we did in the tutorial, you might recall. I don't expect you to, but okay, let me say. So it is true that over F2, you don't need any sort of dependence on n. Okay, so in this result, I said log n times log 1 epsilon. Those guesses came from log n, and there were no guesses when we were working over F2. So log n was not necessary. All that was necessary was log 1 over epsilon. Okay. So if you want to prove a result like this, you really have to use something that's intrinsic to the real numbers and does not hold over other things. It's a statement that depends on you working over the real. So that makes a little interesting, and interesting technical challenges come up when you try to prove such statements. In particular, what we do is use some sort of anti-concentration inequalities that only hold over the reals, cannot be, don't make sense over F2. So, very good. Okay. So I'm not going to say much more about that result. But what I'm going to do is give you one proof, which is the proof, the main result. And what's the main result? The main result is, let me write the main result so that we're all on the same page. So AC0SD has probabilistic polynomials of degree log s to the order d times log 1 over epsilon. So that's the main result. The 1 over epsilon, the log 1 over epsilon comes out of the log. So this is what I'm going to prove, and the proof is extremely simple. It doesn't really talk about AC0 at all. It just talks about how to do error reduction from probabilistic polynomials. Okay, so for now you can forget about AC0 circuits. Just think about the fact that you have a bunch of probabilistic polynomials. You have a probabilistic polynomial for a certain function, some Boolean function. It could be in AC0, it could be not. Right? And now suppose this polynomial makes errors from epsilon. Let's say epsilon equals 1/4, epsilon equals 1. Now I want to reduce error. How do I do? So how do you reduce error? Repetition and
going in the right direction.
Going in the right direction is a good one, but repetition and going in the right direction. Well, repetition and majority, right? Yeah, you repeat an algorithm bunch of times, you do majority. Okay. The question is how to do that with polynomials. Can we do it? And it turns out we can. That's it. That's the result. Right. So let's see. So for every so this is the result. So let f is just some Boolean function, and suppose they have a probabilistic polynomial over the real numbers. It's important over the real numbers. That's what makes this a slight technical challenge, but not much. That gets the function right on every input with probability 3/4. So it's off on 25% of the time on every input. And the degree of this polynomial is at most. So now what we want to do is convert this polynomial to another polynomial. From this polynomial, come with another polynomial that makes error, say at most that epsilon approximation. So it's right with probability 1 minus epsilon. So how do I do? How's the construction? Well, the natural thing is to repeat. So what is repetition here? So now you pick, instead of, so it's a single distribution of polynomials. So now instead of taking a single sample from this distribution, you take t independent samples. Right? That's like running the algorithm t times. You run the algorithm t times, that's repetition. Okay? And then take a majority. So, but what is majority? These are polynomials. We only allowed to use polynomials here. We can't do whatever we want. So, what is majority in the world of polynomials? So, it's got to be majority of t pairs. So, that's some Boolean function of t pairs. Right? perfect. So once we do this, just standard randomized algorithms techniques tell you that you're going to output the right answer type of it. But what is majority? So majority is not a polynomial, but what we can do is represent it by a polynomial of degree at most. Right? So what we're going to do is take the polynomial P1 to P and put on top here. Majority is a Boolean function, but represent majority by a polynomial. I'll call that majority tilde. Right? We know every Boolean function can be represented by a multilinear polynomial. So majority on t bits can be represented by a multilinear polynomial. Any multilinear polynomial on t bits has degree at most t. So majority tilde is some multilinear polynomial of degree at most t composed. Okay. So it seems like you're done, but there is a small problem here. So the degree of this polynomial is going to be at most the degree of the original polynomials times t. And here, if I want the error to be epsilon, I'll have to choose t to be log 1 over epsilon because the error goes down exponentially. So overall degree will be d times log 1 over epsilon. But there is one problem with this entire thing is that the way we've constructed our polynomial, it agrees with the majority function on Boolean inputs. That makes sense. The Boolean extension. But these polynomials are not always Boolean values. Right? I mean, as I said, when the polynomials don't agree with the function, they don't have to take the other Boolean values. They can take large values, they can take, right? They can be really ugly, etc., etc. And this is not actually true of the polynomial we construct. Yeah? This is not a figment of our imagination. It happens in real life, so to speak. So it's a problem. So what we need to do is to also prove that this construction, which actually does work, also is able to handle the fact that some of these PIs are not really taking Boolean values. So why is that true? It's true, but why is it true? It's actually a consequence of a more general observation. It's a very simple observation. It's a very general observation. Yeah, and I can state it in general for a Boolean function. So take any Boolean function on t bits. This is a general observation, but think of G as majority because that's how we're going to apply it. And suppose we have its multilinear polynomial representation G delta. So suppose we fix some of the bits to something. Like for example, in the majority function, if you fix half the bits to 1, the majority function becomes 1. Right? So similarly, let sigma be any sort of partial assignment that collapses the Boolean function g to some value. In majority, it could be half of them set to 1, half of them set to 0. For a general Boolean function, that is something. Right? So what this restriction does is that it also collapses the multilinear polynomial to a constant. So the multilinear polynomial is just some horrible polynomial, algebraic object, right? Now you're setting some of the bits to zeros and ones, and what you know is that this collapses the Boolean function to a constant. But you can show without much work, it's just going back to the unique representation theorem we got in the tutorial, is that once the Boolean function collapses to a constant, the multilinear polynomial extension, the multilinear polynomial representing the Boolean function also collapses to a constant. Okay? So this is a simple fact, but it's actually a subtle fact. It's not an obvious fact. But once you know it, it's one of these NP facts. Once you know it, it's easy to read. Right? So that's it. So now the final polynomial is exactly what I said. So you choose P1 to Pt independently and uniformly at random distribution, and then you compose with the majority tilde polynomial. And what happens is that if half of these, let's say at least half of these were 1s, that means the majority Boolean function collapses to the constant 1, which means the multilinear polynomial extension also collapses to a constant 1, which means it doesn't matter what the other guys are. They could be arbitrary large real values, they don't even have to be integers, they could be irrationals, whatever, it doesn't matter. The polynomials collapse, it doesn't care what is otherwise. Okay, that's it. Yeah, that's all. That's the proof of the theorem. So it's extremely simple. So it's just about error reduction. Once you have that, let me just give you a quick summary of how to get the claimed result. So when for every f in AC0 SD, there exists a polynomial. So this is the old Toda-Ojibara thing, and this is the result. And the idea is to just apply this theorem initially with constant error. Let's say error equals 110. Okay. Then what degree do you get? Log s to the order d. So now I have a degree log s to the order d polynomial that gets the function right with probability 90% on every input. And now I just do this majority trick and get the error down to epsilon, and I get only a log over epsilon. That's it. Questions about this? Alright, good. Okay, candidate reduction has some other nice features that we actually need for the Braverman theorem to go through. It turns out that this polynomial never takes very large values. On every input, the value it takes is, every Boolean input, the value it takes is bounded by something. Similarly, these polynomials that we construct also have a similar property. Okay, so this is just a technical property. It's necessary for the proof of Braverman's theorem. You can ignore it Yeah.
So I guess you'll be using not the usual majority, but the promised majority or something.
So we need to, but for this result we don't really need it. This result is just true as is. We need to use approximate majority for Bremen's theorem. That's right. But that's another technical which I might get to right now. Oh yeah, I will get to right now. Nice. Okay, so as I said, I'm more or less done. So now, how do you prove this Bremen result about pseudo-random generators from this? Well, they said Bremen's result has two ingredients. One is the switching lemma, which we are not going to talk about, so it's a secret. And the second is this polynomial approximation over the reals, which we just improved. Right? So what we'd ideally like to do is to take these improved polynomial approximations, plug into Bremen's theorem, plug and play, everything works out, we get out pops the result. Unfortunately, life is never so nice. So one more ingredient is needed. Okay. And now this you can kind of phase out and ignore, but if you're really interested, so this is what the ingredient is. Okay. So what we need in the proof of Bremen's theorem, and this is really the internals of Bremen's theorem, is that you also need a circuit, an AC0 circuit, that kind of predicts when the polynomial is wrong. You need this fact. Yeah. So you need an error locator function, which kind of tells you whenever this function is 0, the polynomial agrees with the function, and this function is hardly ever 1. Okay? So it tells you when the polynomial is making an error. So it's not just that you have a polynomial, you have a polynomial that agrees with the AC0 function, and when it's wrong, can be predicted by another AC0 function. Okay? It's a highly meta result. It's one of those things that amazes me that Bremen thought of, but this is what it was. Okay. And now we need to be able to do this for these new polynomials we construct. For the original polynomials, Bremen just went through, told us to, or whatever we saw for or, and then we just saw, oh, here it's obviously clear that whenever the polynomial is wrong, we can check into the next result. Okay. But now we construct a new polynomial, so we have to check that these polynomials are wrong or not, and we have to do that with AC0. And the reason there's a problem is that we are using majority. Yeah. And majority is not in AC0. Yes, that's a bad thing. Yeah. So we should not be able to construct such an error locator function. Error locator function. Right. We can't do this. But what you can do is notice that actually most of the time when these polynomials P1 to Pt that we pick, they are right each with high constant probability, right? Let's say 90% of the time. So most of the time, most of them are going to be right, but are not. In which case, we don't really need to compute majority exactly. We just need to check if at least 70% of them say 1, or at least 70% of them say 1. Okay. Right. So there is something called approximate majority, which is the majority problem. Only you remove everything that is hard about the majority problem. Okay. So what you say is if either at most 20% of the bits are 1, or at least 80% of the bits are 1. And now just distinguish between those two things. Okay, that's called approximate majority. And this is really the problem we need to solve in order to do this error locator function. And it in fact can be done in AC. That's an old result modified and all. So we just plug that in, get a break, and then great. I'm still 10 minutes within time. So let me just summarize. Unless there are questions, I could wait 10 minutes instead of 10 seconds. Yeah, other anything?
How many guys should
I have to wait for 10 seconds. Yeah. Okay, so summarizing. So what did we do? Right? So the main result, the only take home, I think, the most important take home of this is error reduction for probabilistic functions. Okay. So this is actually a very simple fact, but for some strange reason it not been observed and it's been used to prove about 3 to 4 results over the last 5 years or so. And there's no reason not to know it. To get that. So it's worth keeping in mind. Yeah. Using this idea of error reduction, we show that AC0ST is epsilon approximated by probabilistic polynomials of degree Z. And we also proved a slight strengthening of Bremen's theorem, which is tight except for this constant in this order D, which hopefully should be 1, but we don't know. We also proved a lower bound for polynomial approximation, that any probabilistic polynomial for the OR function must have degree at least square root. Okay. This is something I didn't go into at all. It's a kind of a technical result, and yeah, it's not something I want to talk about. And, but an open result, a really nice open problem is to make this result fact, improve the square root log n to log n. I believe it should be doable, and it could have implications to improving constant probability, which I think is a nice problem simply because it's a very good motivating example that tells you that the constant equals 1 is the right constant. Okay. So let me stop here.
Tilde.
Tilde. The tilde hangs log. So square root log n by log n the whole square. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thanks.
Are there any more questions? I should also wait for 10 seconds.
At least. I don't know what the rule is for you, but yeah.
Yeah.
The rule is to wait for the question to start and then terminate it.
Sorry? No, we have to get your jokes on camera, so you please tell me and I will repeat. Yeah. So I was just saying yesterday to Neelthara that before every talk we probably get Rahul to come here and warm up the crowd, you know, it's like yeah, so
Yeah, so you're very fast, 10 seconds, so you can't just speak again.
Before we eat for lunch, a couple of quick announcements. So the afternoon session starts at 1:30. So